at 6:07. I'll call the meeting to order. And if we could start with a roll call.
Headlines.
Present.
Committee members Edgerton.
Here.
Hintermeister.
Here.
Wolf. Hutchison. Lovelace.
Here.
Brown. Oliver.
Here.
Thank you. Second item, report of the chair. The last week's Morgan Hill Times and Morgan Hill Life, the lead story in both papers was about the Open Space Authority and the Habitat Agency's acquisition of the conservation rights, and I could be wrong on exactly what it is, but it was, significant in the newspaper's judgment, and very definitely in mine, I think everyone else's, that we are actually taking the first baby step, and it was a pretty good baby step. So we're moving ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a critical piece of landscape out there for the butterfly and the rare plant. So it was, OSA did a great job negotiating the sale of the property with the United Technology Corporation, and the existence of the plan leveraged funding. 5.7 million was a result of this plan being in place that went towards the acquisition of the property. It was grant funding that this plan was able to leverage for the region. So it was a big baby step. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a question about that, if I could. Was there any issue of toxics, or what is the status of that, since that was
No, but on the Coyote Ridge portions, no, but the valley portions, yes. It's an active cleanup site. All the soil contamination's been removed, but there's active groundwater cleanup going on, and pumping and purification. Okay. It could take 40 to 100 years to clean up the groundwater, from what I've been told. Yeah. But the ridge property's clean.
Yeah, and that was pointed out at the implementation board, that the rocket fuel runoff site is not part of the conservation easement, because I mean that very definitely is a concern for anyone who's lived down here. So, Dick, if you could start us off, if we're going to go this way, if any of the members have anything to say to start or mention?
I don't. Thank you.
Okay.
Nothing to report.
Well, okay.
Well, you went to a conference, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to a couple really interesting meetings in the last probably a couple weeks ago. One was the Burro and Owl Consortium meeting, which is last weekend, where there were Burro and Owl researchers from all over, mostly Northern California, but not entirely Northern California, just talking about Burro and owls in general, and HCPs. There were some kind words for the Santa Clara Valley HCP specifically. And then also a few days before that, the South Bay Restoration Project, Salt Pond Restoration Project, had an all-day science symposium. And that was also very, very interesting. Not so relevant to us, but in terms of the bay and kind of all our futures here, it was a very interesting discussion of kind of all their issues: sediment, mercury. Quite a lot of really good information. They have that every 2 years to kind of feed into their adaptive management strategy. I'm not sure whether we're going to do something similar.
Yes.
But,
yes.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting for members of the public to kind of see what their dollars being spent on and what's going into the management process.
Okay, Craig?
Nothing.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I actually do have something. Jan just reminded me of something, just a question to see what we're doing. I know that the city of Morgan Hill has a burrowing owl fund, and they're still collecting burrowing owl fees from developers, even though we have the HCP. And it was my understanding from talking with the city that they're going to turn those funds over to our district. And I wonder if that's happening, is that in the process?
Yes.
When is that going to happen?
Yes, so the fees they had been collecting from whenever this program, the inception of the program until around 2013-14, have been remitted to the agency, and it was nearly $400,000. And the fees they're currently collecting, they will be giving to us at some point in the future.
Is there any intent for them to do away with that separate fee? Because the
Yes.
HCP was
Yes.
supposed to take care of that.
Yes, my understanding is it's supposed to sunset within the next couple of years. It's tied to the general plan update. Yeah. But yes, it will go away.
And the general plan update in Morgan Hill should be complete within 6 months to, at the farthest out, a year.
That's my understanding. They said something like 2017 that this fee would go away.
But
I
meanwhile,
believe that's the date.
Is the charge being assessed by us and the city?
No, it has nothing to do with us.
Okay.
But the city gave us the monies because we have the capacity and sort of the focus to spend the money on Burrowing Owl issues. And so they were kind enough to say, hey, help us spend the money. And of course, we didn't say no. So it's definitely going to go a long way to trying to save the birds in North County and create habitat for them in South County. Yeah.
Well, and we'll hear more of that later on tonight.
Correct.
Okay. So, it's time for public comment. If anyone wants to comment on anything that's not on the agenda, we invite you to introduce yourself and come forward, and we'll be glad to listen.
Good evening. My name is Mike Monroe. Do you need my address for the record, or? Thank you. This is my first time to this group's meeting, so thank you very much. That's the most important thing to say, I think, is that I really do appreciate the service and the intent for the Habitat Plan. I came with a couple purposes. One is to ask, is there a outreach program, or if a nonprofit entity wanted to talk to somebody in a public setting about what the plan is all about or what the agency does, is there something like that?
So are you wondering if, like myself or someone from the staff could come speak to one of your groups?
So I'm
Sure.
on the board of the Historical Society, and we have a lot of people who are interested in preservation and what the agency does, and it's not very well out there, let's say.
Right.
So I thought that we try to make an approach to the agency or to the committee if there was someone that might represent the plan and what it's been doing.
Yeah, I could give a presentation to
Thank
your
you.
group. Yep.
Okay.
And he gets extra points for doing that.
Well, I was going to say, we would feed him really good cookies, okay? Or regular cookies or something like that. It was a big week. About a week and a half ago, the newspaper in Morgan Hill Times had the Open Space Authority and County Parks bought a big chunk, and the deal, I understand, is going to be complete after the first of the year. So we have basically almost a complete linkage on the east side, all the way up, I believe. Almost all the Diablo Range, Coyote Ridge is all in some sort of public domain. So that's really good news. I live in Gilroy, so before I read the Morgan Hill Times, I read the Gilroy Dispatch. And they had an article in there about a developer receiving a permit from the city to remove oak trees. I don't know if anybody saw that. And
Hundreds of oak trees.
yes.
And to be replaced by 15-gallon oak trees.
Yeah, on a 3-to-1 ratio, which is very interesting. So as an advisory committee, I would say maybe we should advise the city that removing oak tree habitat on that magnitude and replacing it with baby oak trees, 600 and something, is kind of a really weird way to do things. I happen to live close to that area, and just the thought of oak trees that are 200 or 300 years old being removed for housing pads and infrastructure is somewhat distressing. And the trade-off of planting 600 and some odd new oak trees in an area, it's like, who's in charge here? How can they do that? Who's going to manage all those oak trees? And I think it's a real loss of habitat. That's the bottom line here. The city, I think, should have really stepped up to the plate in terms of the existing county and state guidelines on what happens when you remove oak habitat. So, and finally, I just want to again say thank you. I'm here to learn more about what the agency does and what the committee does. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mike, can I ask you a question, please? Hello, how are you?
Thanks.
I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of this removal of the trees. Can I just ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
In terms of what was the notice given on this, and does the city not have a tree ordinance? Most do.
The city does have an ordinance, so I am going to go in and dig into it. In fact, 1998 or something was the year of the oak tree, and I went down to the city council, and they made a proclamation that the city of Gilroy is a tree city, is very supportive of maintaining oak tree habitat. So I read the article in the paper last week with, how did this happen?
Do you know why the oak trees were removed?
Country Estates is enlarging its development.
I see. So it was. So this usually would have to be part of some sort of CEQA document when they do something like that.
You know, the Country Estates has been out there for a long time.
Yeah, and that could be a very old EIR.
Right.
And it would be interesting to know if the ordinance was updated after that EIR. So check in with me. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, it's, if you walk up there and you see these magnificent trees, and to be replaced by 15-gallon saplings is, it's pretty bad. Thank you.
Well, Mike, and another option is to go down and talk to the city council at the same time, you know, in a similar vein, because I think, you know, the article in the newspaper raised a lot of questions of people who read that particular article. And then also some of the oak trees were judged to be not in good shape, but from reading between the lines, though, there's more to it than that.
Right.
Right.
The Gilroy Dispatch, you have to go behind the scenes to understand what's happening. It's unfortunate that...
Well, I guess the first thing to do is start to find out if there was a current arborist report, too, because you'd know what the condition of those trees were.
Well, certainly oak trees, almost all trees are drought stressed, so you could say, yeah, that tree's not doing so good, but it's a judgment call sometimes, you know, which tree stays, which tree needs to be removed. So I will get to the city of Gilroy and say, what are you guys doing?
And give the newspaper a call ahead of time, letting them know you're going to be there.
There are other people that are very interested in this too, so thank you.
Thank you. And then for the, do we have any other comment? And then I would like to take up my, resume my comments because I forgot. We do have a new member, Jess Brown. He is the Executive Director of the Santa Cruz County and the Santa Clara County Farm Bureau. And he is going to be joining us at the next meeting. He has been appointed, but he could not be here tonight. And number two, just to throw it out there, we do have an opening for a business person to be on the advisory board as well. So if anyone knows anyone who can wear that hat, then we can get up to the full 9.
Are there any specific requirements for that position?
For business,
They're representing business. Could it be a retired person, or does it have to be
Yes.
someone working for a business currently, or what's the?
somebody that would be a good advocate for the sort of the economic business side of how this plan works or doesn't work for the business community. Someone that could be a representative of the larger business community. Yeah. But I think if they're retired and they're active with like the Chamber of Commerce or, yeah, have them apply. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the, getting to the regular business, we have to approve the minutes for the February 5 meeting. If I could get a motion and a second.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Thank you.
I'd like to make one change to the August.
Okay.
Um, Just-
We're on the February right now.
Or just February, okay.
Right, okay. So all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? No opposed, so the motion passes unanimously. Item number 2, approve the minutes of the August 6th regular board meeting. Jan?
Yeah, just the report of the chair, I think we should change that. Sounds like he's eating coyotes. You fix that? Okay.
Yes, thank you. I wasn't going to say anything. All right, so if I could get a motion and a second?
I so move.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Abstaining because I wasn't here at that meeting.
Okay, and so we 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, that's fine.
5.
5, yes. Yes, we do have 5. So motions and any noes? Hearing no noes, the motion passes unanimously. And then we're on to item 3 of the agenda, the Western Burrowing Owl presentation. And I really like the picture at the end of the supplement.
Wow, where did that come from? Does anybody know?
Your area.
I took that picture
So,
on Tulare Hill.
That makes it mean even more.
Yeah, anyway, it was a good, when I saw the picture, I went, oh my God, that
that's
is
a great
so cool.
picture.
I submitted it to the Smithsonian Institution in a contest, but
Oh.
never heard anything back from them.
So I'd like to introduce Troy Rumke from ICF International. He's kind of, him and Kailash are the point persons on our Burrowing Owl program. And he's here to give you an update on what's going on. And it's going to be very similar to the presentation you guys had last year. Do you want questions during the presentation, Troy, or how would? Okay. All right. So no further ado, Troy.
Hi, everybody. Some of you were here at the same time last year, and we'll do this again next year and for every year for the next 50 years, I guess.
Good.
Yeah.
Keep it up.
Yeah, that's right. And the intent here really is we've come through, yet another burrowing owl breeding season, and we've, like we have in the past, done surveys throughout the breeding territory of burrowing owls, and now we have kind of a summary of what's happening this year and a little comparison to what we learned last year, and we can talk about that as we get into it. I do skip over most of the kind of nuts and bolts of why we're doing this, so if you have a question about that because you weren't here last year or whatever, we can talk about that later, but I kind of jump right into it this time and try to keep it a little bit shorter. I will give a little bit of an overview, just a one-slide overview of the strategy itself, just as a reminder as to why we're doing this and why I'm here talking to you, and then a summary of this year's effort, population trends, at least what we can say from a couple of years of data and how that kind of ranks historically in the South Bay here. And we have a couple of other interesting things going on, so I'll give you a little update on a winter banding project that's happening kind of outside of the plan, but certainly related to the work that we're doing. And then we'll look forward for a couple of slides and think about what's coming up next year. So just a quick overview. A lot of words here on this slide, really more just you can digest at your own rate later. But as you know, there is a kind of a separate burrowing owl conservation strategy that is attached to the plan, which is slightly outside of everything we're doing for the other covered species. And that's in large part, at least currently, because burrowing owls are persisting in areas that don't exactly overlap with our other covered species. So a lot in North San Jose and in around the fringe of the South Bay. So we had to take a little bit of a different approach with this species when compared to the other covered species, and that's why we have the separate strategy. And along with that comes some just very simple kind of tenets of that strategy. So protect and manage occupied burrowing owl nesting habitat. That sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but basically what that means is we want to focus on the owls where they are now, and you'll hear a lot about that as we go through the surveys and presentation today or tonight. We want to be able to increase the survival of owls, and in order to say that we're doing that, we have to know what they are. So that's why we're doing this annual survey effort for owls. A lot of coordination with other South Bay local governments, advocacy groups, and so forth, and you'll hear about that with the South Bay Burrowing Owl Survey Network, who is in large part responsible for all the work I'm going to talk to you about tonight. That has something to do with the 2 meetings that we have each year. So just like last year, we had our spring meeting before the breeding season and our fall meeting after the breeding season to kind of wrap it up. We have some pilot studies starting, so I'll talk about the winter banding study. We have some ideas for some future studies to learn a little bit more about how owls are using the natural environment of our study area and what we can do to kind of begin to increase their numbers over time. And as part of that, we have ongoing work with assessing areas to bring some land into the reserve system that we can manage specifically for burrowing owls. So that land's in short supply in the county for sure, but we're still seeking out and trying to prioritize areas that can become part of a burrowing owl reserve system. Just as a reminder here, this is basically a very high level and general overview of how burrowing owls use the study area. So you see the study area there in red, and then as a reminder, we have this extended burrowing owl conservation area, which is the purple area that kind of circles up around the southern ring of the bay there. The reason why we added that on was because there are a lot of owls that are nesting just outside of our permit area, and we wanted to make sure we captured those in any conservation efforts that we did and gave us basically the ability to do conservation in that area. So that's why there's that extended area. So you see on this map, and this is an old map, but on this map, the little green blobs there are basically where owls are nesting. So it's very much in urban San Jose, mostly North San Jose and up around the ring of the bay itself. And then they do use other parts of the study area in different ways. So in the wintertime, they certainly use the hills and the grassland. There's a lot of potential habitat for them down the valley. There aren't a lot of historical records in those places, but there certainly is habitat that we normally would consider suitable for owls in that area. So, yes, Craig.
I'd reviewed it earlier, and it said in there that even parts of San Mateo County are covered. And this map doesn't go to San Mateo County, does it? Or does it?
This is just, this basically, I guess maybe it might go a little bit. It basically goes to the bridge. So the intent is for it really just to include right up to the border of Santa Clara, San Mateo County.
So the San Mateo County border is the Dumbarton? I don't know where exactly.
Well, I'm looking at it on the map, and there's a slightly different shading, and maybe you can't see it on your version. But it might actually just go a little bit into San Mateo, but if any, it's just a little bit.
So it just touches it there. That's what I wanted to clarify.
That's right.
It didn't go further up the peninsula.
No.
Okay, that's why I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep.
Thanks.
We would go further if there were owls up there.
Well, I didn't think there were,
Yeah.
and I hadn't heard about it, and I was wondering, what are we doing? Okay, thanks.
So a quick summary of what we did this year, actually very similar to last year. So this is one example of the habitat plan, I think getting into kind of a routine. So we, just like last year, we had 2 meetings, as I mentioned a second ago, one in the spring and around March, right before the breeding season starts. The groups attending that meeting are shown on the slide here. This is kind of what we've coined as the South Bay Burrowing Owl Survey Network. People who are doing surveys for their own purposes, most of the time unrelated to the plan, but that we definitely want to coordinate with and pull into our survey effort so that we aren't just looking at our study area, but we're really looking around the whole South Bay and can understand what the owls are doing across the board. So we met with the group before the breeding season, got everything straightened out in terms of who's surveying where and what the protocols are, what the methodologies are. And then we got this group back together again in October as we gathered up everybody's information and put it together in the burrowing owl report, which you saw in your meeting materials. And the objectives this year varied just a little bit from last year. Last year we were really focused in North San Jose on where owls were, and we wanted to really get a handle on the distribution of owls in the northern part of San Jose. This year we were still looking at those areas. We dropped a few locations out that we thought weren't very suitable based on what we found last year. And then we wanted to pick up some additional locations down the valley here around Morgan Hill and even further south around Gilroy and even around, south of Gilroy along the San Benito County line. So last year, because of budget constraints and other things, we didn't really get a chance to go and look down in South County. This year we wanted to make sure that we did that. So that was something we did. And then continuing, while we were doing that, out there surveying for owls, in some cases we didn't necessarily find owls, but it also gives us a chance every year to check in on some of those parcels that we think might have some potential to support owls in the future. And then we can, that helps us kind of prioritize conservation opportunities as we go on.
I have a question at this point. Mm-hmm. So you're mentioning that you had a chance to go down into South County, which you haven't before, or up until what point? Has it been done in the past? Did you have something to sort of take a look at numbers before?
Yeah, so what I meant by that was really there hasn't been a coordinated survey effort in that part of the county. So there's lots of groups working down there. TNC is working down there, the Open Space Authority and others. There are surveys related to project-specific work, obviously. So we do have historical occurrences from southern Santa Clara County, and then there are some more recent occurrences just across the county line in San Benito County, and that kind of agricultural matrix down there. Mm-hmm. So we definitely know that owls use that area at kind of a low level, but we haven't spent the time to do kind of a systematic, look at that part of the county. So that was the purpose.
Okay, so on the first page of your report, the last paragraph, it mentions that the numbers are down. So this number, so I'm trying to understand, this takes in all the usual area plus the South County before, which you really hadn't had a really good feel for.
That's correct, yep.
And so I guess we'll get into why you think the numbers are down, or could it be a reflection of you didn't really have a good count before, something that was really accurate,
Sure.
and maybe that's part of the fluctuation?
Yeah, good question. We can get into that. I would say that's probably not part of the fluctuation.
Okay.
I mean, historically there haven't been a lot of owls down there, so even if we, had been missing some, we probably weren't missing a lot down there, down there being just south of here, southern part of the county. And but that certainly could be, but I don't think owls have been persisting in very high numbers down there, for quite a while. So.
Okay, thanks.
And the spoiler alert on the why is we don't really know why the numbers are down, but we have some ideas. No, I know. That's right. That's good. So this is a pretty detailed map for a presentation, but I think a useful one to just give you some sense of number one, the extent of the survey effort, and number two, this in some ways really reflects the coordination going on with the other entities here in the South Bay, where when we sat down with the burrowing owl survey group in the spring, we're kind of talking at this level. Okay, who's covering this location? Who's covering that location? We have a pretty good sense now of who's responsible for what areas, so we make sure we're not missing anything. And it's been, a really great, I think, benefit to the Habitat Agency to have, in essence, these sort of volunteer efforts from other municipalities and other organizations to kind of allow us to use their survey information from these locations. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. That's all right. So this is just a map kind of showing you the extent of the survey area and then how we kind of organize ourselves around these areas. And then slide 10 here is really the results. So the green areas are where we have nesting burrowing owls, or we documented basically adults during the breeding season this year. So we had adults out there, basically between March or April all the way, through July or August. Now, certainly there are some cases where we might have had one adult that we weren't sure ever really nested or bred, but they were there during the nesting season. So in our view, they were attempting to nest. And then I'll talk about the winter banding study in a minute, but we have more detailed information now in these kind of orangish blobs that you're seeing on the map. And these are areas where a crew has been out looking for and trapping and banding burrowing owls during the wintertime. So not during the breeding season, but during the wintertime, to get a sense of not only how are owls using the study area during that important nesting season, but how are they using it during the breeding season. You can see that they use a lot more areas during the wintertime. They're up in the hills a little bit more. The trick is that when you get into January, February, then they start leaving those winter locations and looking for nest sites. Sometimes that's in the county, and sometimes they migrate somewhere else, somewhere north, could be anywhere. The one thing that I want to make sure that I point out on this map is that we're showing the breeding sites and the winter sites. All these breeding sites also have owls there during the winter time. So there are winter owls kind of all over the place, but they're only breeding in the county right now in the green spots. So that's just an important distinction. And then here are the numbers from this year, and the next slide I have a comparison to last year. And essentially, we have, when you're looking at adults during the breeding season, we have 74 adults basically in the areas where we've been surveying, which is, as you saw from the map, a pretty comprehensive look at the study area, I think. But 74 seems like an okay number, but the most important thing to take away from this, I think, is that we still are in a situation which we've been in for a while now, where almost all the owls are concentrated in just a few locations. So Moffett Airfield, San Jose Airport, the Water Pollution Control Plant, and then to a lesser degree at Shoreline Golf Course and at Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. So not only, I think, are the numbers going down, but they're also shrinking in where they're located. So there are fewer owls in even fewer locations. And then we've also added on here the number of young fledged. This isn't a number that the Habitat Agency and that the Habitat Plan requires us to track necessarily. So we're tracking number of adult owls as our index really. But this year, I think surveyors were better able to get a good handle on the number of owls that they thought were fledging from nests. Last year, the information was a little bit more sketchy on that. We didn't have as good a data on that last year. But it is useful to know, not only how many owls are attempting to nest, but are they being successful? And we have some ideas for next year and for future years about, how can we dig into that even deeper and find out where are the constraints for the owls? At what point in the nesting cycle are they really, suffering losses? And then how can we correct that through conservation actions? So here's a comparison last year to this year. Now we have data going back for a couple of these locations all the way back to the early 1990s for the San Jose Airport, for example. And I can maybe put this, I don't have a slide that puts this in that context, but I would say that when you look at this, we look like it's a pretty big decline last year to this year. We lost, 33 adult owls during the season, or they didn't show up again. And we had lower numbers in every location except for at the San Jose Santa Clara water treatment facility, where they had, a few more owls. They also actually had pretty good production at the water treatment facility, but they had per nest, they had better production at the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge this year. So, there's obviously different things happening in different locations that might influence why numbers went down. At our meeting in October, we had kind of a round table where we, talked to everybody and said, what do you think is happening at your site? Most people didn't have a really definitive answer. There are some, worries about adjacent land uses and changes in land use patterns, like at Don Edwards. They've had some changes in land uses, not on the refuge itself, but on lands next to the refuge, which may reduce foraging habitat and things like that. And other than that, I think people thought generally the food resources were probably there, the habitat was probably okay. There are some new things happening on the landscape, like at Shoreline Golf Course. They've had an increased amount of vandalism of burrows on the golf course itself, which hasn't happened historically. So there are some one-off things that are probably influencing that. Of burrows, yeah. So putting things in burrows and damaging burrows. But burrows that are in active use by owls during the nesting season, so that would obviously have an impact. So there's probably a lot of things going on here that influence this. These numbers aren't the lowest numbers we've seen over the last 20, 25 years, but they're very close to the lowest numbers. So I would say, going back to this slide where we look at, if you look at that kind of permit area subtotal in the middle where I have 41 adult owls, I think we've one time in the last maybe 20, 25 years, we've had it a little bit lower than that once, but this is definitely probably one of the bottom 3 years we've seen. So just to give you a little bit of context there on that. And, could be drought related, could be any number of things, could bounce back this year. Owls do that, owls can cycle. But it is something that the group, when we got together in October, was certainly concerned about and wanted to think about, how can we fix this? What are the options on the table to fix this?
Have the management practices changed dramatically at the airport? I mean, that used to be like a bright spot for all
Yeah, not really. So one thing that changed at the airport, I don't think the management practices have changed. This year they had, so USDA is managing their not just their burrowing owl program, but really their animal services program across the board. And they've been surveying there for the last couple of years. And they did have a changeover of USDA personnel that are doing the surveys, kind of right at the beginning or maybe the first third of the breeding season. And I don't think they necessarily missed anything because I have confidence in what they were doing out there. But that's the only thing that's changed out there. One interesting thing that happened there this year is that they have a whole bunch of artificial burrows installed at the airport, and then there are still some natural burrows. And traditionally, I think they've had maybe kind of 50-50 owls using artificial burrows and natural burrows, and sometimes even using more of the artificial burrows than natural burrows, because they tend to collapse the natural burrows to keep them off the airfield. And this year they were using almost all natural burrows, which is kind of and again, like kind of a head scratcher, but it's just something that they noticed this year. There is a little bit of construction activity happening on the west side of the airport with there's kind of a new, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a private air hangar going on there. They didn't seem to think that was probably causing too much of a disturbance to the owls because there weren't a lot immediately around there, but that's wrapping up now. So if it was causing any stress on that breeding population, maybe next year they'll pop up, pop back. But yeah, I think the management's been pretty consistent there. Yeah.
I had one question. I couldn't find south of Reed Hillview Airport. Mm-hmm. There's the shopping center, and then there's a big vacant field beyond that. I don't know what that's called, and I didn't see it on the list of locations. Is that area being surveyed? And maybe it's just because I don't know what that's called, but I couldn't identify it on the not on this list. There was a detailed list, and it had Lake Cunningham east and west. It had Reed Hillview, but I don't know what that's called, that big vacant lot, but I've heard that there have been owls there. Has that been surveyed?
Yeah, there's two.
And is that on the list?
There's two spots. So I went back to this more detailed map, which is, the printing is probably so small that we can't read it because I was squinting to see it. But so Reed Hillview there are some places on there that didn't get surveyed this year because the habitat quality was so poor from last year. But a couple of the spots did in and around. So there's in and around Reed Hillview itself, there are some spots. That airport itself hasn't been surveyed for a couple of years. And then the place that you're thinking about maybe it might be the Meadow Fair Park area. So
it's just south of the East Ridge Shopping Center. It's a big vacant lot.
Yeah, that's the one.
So I haven't seen them, but I've been told there's quite a number of them have been there in the past.
Yeah, I think for the last several years there's been one breeding pair there. And I think they weren't there this year, if I recall.
And what's that referred to as?
There's Meadow Fair Park, which is a city
Meadow
park.
Fair Park.
And then
maybe that's right.
And then the area north of that, and that's the I can't think of the developer site.
Yeah, the development there's development proposed for that site. It's referred to a few names: Arcadia, Evergreen, and I believe that's the area you're referring to. And like Troy said, up until this year's survey, there was a breeding pair out there.
So it was surveyed this year, or is it going to be
Yes,
surveyed?
yes,
Okay,
it
okay,
was. But there was that breeding pair was absent.
Okay.
So I guess the upshot of all of this, and the reason why we come before you, and we'll be talking with the governing board as well, is that, as you know, every year we go out and we do these surveys and we get a better understanding of where the owls are in that given year, and then we combine that survey data of that breeding season with the previous two, so we have 3 years of survey data, and that then we put a half-mile buffer around those locations, and that becomes what we call quote-unquote occupied burrowing owl habitat, and that's a term that comes out of the plan. So what I'm showing here on this slide is that half-mile buffer off of the locations where we had positive burrowing owl nesting surveys either this year or going back to 2013, and that becomes basically the fee base for the burrowing owl conservation fee. So it doesn't, it only changed slightly from last year, so we found basically owls in the same locations that we looked for them, this year we found owls in basically the same locations as last year, and the half-mile buffers moved around a little bit, just based on where the owl nests were, but not a lot. And this map is basically then, the fee base going forward, and then just to kind of play that out for the coming years, there certainly will be locations that, right now this includes everything back to 2013. If there's something on here, and actually I don't think there is anything on here, but if there's something on here, or maybe the Reed Hillview Airport is a good example where there haven't been owls since 2013, then next year those areas might drop out of the fee base. So it's kind of this rolling 3-year survey effort, and the idea being that if we haven't seen owls out there in the last 3 years, then everybody's pretty confident that they're not there. And that's just how the plan was set up, from the beginning. So that's what this map is showing you, is basically the fee base now for this. It will be for 2016, and then we'll be back here in front of you next year talking about what it will be for 2017 and so forth. Any questions on that before I go on to the banding study? Okay. So I think we've talked a couple different times about other studies that are going on related to the habitat plan. They might not be completely funded by the Habitat Agency or 100%, staffed by the agency or consultants that are working for the agency. And this is a good example where Dr. Lynn Trulio from San Jose State University and a couple of other folks, Phil Higgins and Deborah Kromzak, they basically got together and applied for and received a local assistance grant from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Again, similar to the discussion earlier about the UTC property, it was really they really got the grant because this habitat plan is in place and this conservation strategy is in place. And they did a year's, last winter they went out and did, several months worth of burrowing owl trapping and banding in a lot of these winter locations to get a better handle on the distribution during the wintertime. They are going to do that again this winter, and they have another grant in to do some additional work. And one of the interesting things that they found out here was that in a few of these locations, they had owls there during the wintertime, and they actually had single owls hanging out in these locations right up until the beginning of the breeding season, so like maybe all the way through February and into March, and then they ended up leaving. And the thought is, or the question that everybody kind of has is, what if we could convince them to stay? And obviously we can't talk to them and convince them to stay, but if there are ways that we could make the habitat a little bit better or do some other things out there to make it good nesting habitat so that they would not just winter there, but that they would actually stay to nest, it might be a way for us to expand where nesting owls are in the study area. So we have some ideas starting maybe next year about how to do that, to create some additional foraging opportunities for them, maybe do some things with attractants, maybe trying to attract other owls to those locations because they're going there at least in the wintertime, and they're sticking around for quite a while into the spring, but then they're just not staying to nest. So that's just probably the most interesting thing that they found out during the study last year, and we'll see if they find the same thing again this year. And then aside from that, looking forward, I've mentioned already a couple of times, we're continuing to look at parcels. One of the struggles we've always had with the burrowing owl strategy is that the owls are in some of the, if they're not on an airport, they're in the most expensive place, really to buy land in the county. So that's challenging, obviously. But nonetheless, we have the freedom to not just buy land, but also to execute these management agreements with landowners. And so we're continually looking for suitable sites, even if they're in, urban San Jose, if they can support owls. We're interested in, trying to get a short-term management agreement in place with a landowner where we can manage the site better and try to, attract owls or increase the population in those locations. Continuing to coordinate with existing mitigation sites. So before the habitat plan ever came online, there are people were mitigating for burrowing owls. We talked about the Morgan Hill strategy earlier, and there's other examples of that in San Jose where typically through CEQA they would have to set aside some land for some period of time for burrowing owls. And there's lots of those sites scattered around. They're usually pretty small, and a lot of them aren't being managed very well because they were short-term commitments. And so one thing that the Habitat Agency, particularly Ed and Kailash, have been doing is working with the owners of those areas where they may have kind of lost interest in managing those sites for owls because they don't have the requirement to, and the Habitat Agency has been able to play kind of an advisory role to those groups about, what's the best time to mow, how do you install artificial burrows, and are there ways to keep those mitigation sites functioning even though they've, not been doing as good of a job over time. So that's, a kind of a side benefit. That wasn't something that was necessarily anticipated in the burrowing owl conservation strategy, but it's been a really nice side benefit this year. And then we're still focusing on what we call Tier 3 recovery actions. So these are, I think, becoming increasingly important, and these are the kind of things that are anything besides just, buying land and calling it conservation. This is really active recovery. So thinking about, what can we do to actively increase the nest success of owls or actively increase the fledging success? Are there, opportunities to supplement feeding for owls in some locations, or would it make sense to, try to do some even more intensive things like captive breeding or moving owls around, trying to get them to populate places where they historically haven't been? All of those things require an enormous amount of coordination and discussion with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they get approval on all that stuff. But the wheels are certainly in motion. As we see the numbers drop, I think there is a heightened sense of urgency around trying to get some of those actions in the ground for next year, or certainly for the year following, knowing it'll take a little time to work those approvals through. And then sort of in a similar fashion to the Habitat Agency playing a bit of an advisory role with some of these other mitigation sites, as we were having our roundtable discussion with the burrowing owl survey group in October, it became apparent that everybody's kind of scratching their heads. Even though we're coordinating, everybody's still managing their sites differently for different reasons, surveying their sites separately. And even though we come together, which is a lot better than we ever used to do, we thought there would be some real value to getting kind of a technical group, a subgroup of this burrowing owl survey group together to go out to kind of the key locations and really take a look at what are the conditions of the site in March when owls start setting up nest sites, and are there things that we can do? Are there any shared experiences that we can bring to the table to help people manage their sites better for owls, to do everything we can every breeding season to make sure that we're maximizing the production of owls. And I think that subset of experts, people that are working at each of these locations, will probably do that next year, where they'll take a day or two and go out and visit each site and come up with kind of a priority list of management actions that can be deployed right away that could be useful. Another idea that came out of that group is to convene a technical workshop of outside experts. So we're looking to maybe do that early next year. And we have an incredible amount of knowledge about burrowing owls in the South Bay. We're really lucky that way. But there's people studying burrowing owls all over the western United States and Canada and in other places. And I think the group is interested in bringing in some, a handful of other experts from outside of the study area and saying, here's our situation, here's what we know, and here's what we don't know, and just to get maybe a fresh perspective on that. So we'll probably convene a 1 or 2 day workshop on that would involve some, site visits and things like that, just to get some new perspective on where we're headed. And then to more aggressively pursue conservation easements and fee title acquisition. So we will by, this time next year, we'll probably incur more, quote unquote, burrowing owl habitat impacts, and so we're going to need to start, setting aside some land to stay ahead of our requirements, and so we'll, be more aggressively pursuing those opportunities in 2016 than we have been up to date, because we haven't had the impacts to date. And I think that's all. Any questions?
So, questions from board members?
Yeah, when you were talking about basically coordination with existing mitigation sites and going out to parcels that maybe have sort of lagged behind in terms of managing them. There were no burrowing owls on those sites, so it's just right now trying to manage the habitat in the hopes that it might be used.
That's right, yeah. I mean, a good example of what happens is, or what has happened historically, maybe back through the 90s certainly, and maybe even into the early 2000s, burrowing owl isn't a listed species, so it's primarily dealt with through CEQA. And a lot of times, even as recently as 2001 or 2, there might be a requirement to mitigate for owls, but the requirement to manage the site might only be for like 3 years, not in perpetuity, so it wouldn't be an easement in perpetuity. And so they did that, and then now it's just, kind of grown up and it's a tall grass area, and maybe there are artificial burrows installed, but they weren't maintained. So it's just not really functioning well. So there aren't any owls there, and that's not a surprise because it's not great habitat. So the role that the agency's been playing is to just, go out and work with those people they own the site, and just say, here are some simple things you can do. Like, here's our advice on how you would mow, where you'd mow, here's how to fix the burrows. And just to, kind of keep it functioning as a mitigation site, again, to hope the owls will recolonize. So that's kind of how it's working.
About how many of those sites are there out there?
Oh, I don't know, maybe
We're currently working with one entity in the Alviso area, but there's both public and private sites throughout the North Bay area. North-South Bay area.
Okay, so is there sort of strategy as to which ones you're approaching?
Yeah, yes. Audubon's been helping us either by putting the fire underneath somebody and saying, hey, you need to manage your land better, or by introducing us to potential partners. To develop that collaborative relationship on managing. A lot of these are landfills.
Okay.
Unfortunately, given shockingly, with all the open space in this county, and there's a lot, but it's in the hills. There's not much in the valley, even in the way of city parks. So it's a heavily built environment. So a lot of the best land left is landfills. The challenge with landfills is that they're being managed for our garbage or our toxic waste. So methane releases, and so they're not too happy about burrowing owls. And well, it's more the ground squirrels they don't like, but burrowing owls need ground squirrels as part of their life cycle. So so far I'm going to meet with Palo Alto, talk about. There's a park there and there's a landfill there, and see what we can do or not do. Meeting with I can't get into details with the private landowner. We don't have a deal yet, but I'm cautiously optimistic we can get a deal. And part of what came out of those negotiations is that they realized that they needed to manage the land differently. It's not that they weren't abiding by their conditions of approval of their project, but it was just like the timing of the mowing, and then we're also going to supplement their activities to try to get the owls to come back. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
So maybe Audubon has mentioned this, but in terms of locations, I continue to think that Sunnyvale Baylands would be an excellent place to look. I mean, it hasn't been that long since owls were there. They were very dense. And the Baylands is still a good location, just has been a bit, left alone. In addition to the landfill site there, but really the Baylands property along 237, I think it would have a lot of possibilities.
Thank you.
The other question I'd have is, Troy, maybe you can remind me of this. I mean, part of it is, why are we doing these surveys? There was like some model that I never understood that required like 10 years of data. I think it was what led to this 150 owl goal for increases. So as we do these surveys, are there any triggers just with the raw data themselves that would lead us to kind of radically change our approach? Or are we really having to wait for 10 years of data to feed into this model to get good? Or how does that model fit into this?
Good question. So the model that Jan's referring to is a population viability analysis that we did, and it's an appendix to the plan if you ever want to read something really great. I'm just kidding. It's an appendix to the plan, but basically what it did was it took, at the time we had 3 sites where we had the most data, and we needed at least 10 years of data to run that model. So we had San Jose Airport, Moffett Airfield, and Shoreline Golf Course. Those are the 3 sites that we had the numbers of adult owls during the breeding season. We plugged into this model, and basically what we were trying to figure out was, what that model tells you is, how long do you have before the population gets to a point where it's unsustainable, based on what we know about the number of owls, the way that the population is cycled over time. And then we flipped that around and we said, okay, if that's how long it takes before it gets unsustainable, what would you have to do to keep it sustainable? How many owls would you have to add every year to keep it sustainable? So in the plan, you'll see a graph that basically shows, in an idealistic world, what would it look like if we started with this many owls and we had to, add, basically it tells us to add 3 owls every year, and then you project that out and you end up with 150 owls or whatever it is. So the trigger that's built into the plan is we have that kind of like idealistic trajectory, 3 hours a year, which we know it's going to go up and down. It's not going to be exactly that. If we and so we have that line on the graph. If we stay above that line, we're doing okay. The population is remaining sustainable for the long term. If we dip below that line, what the plan says we have to do is basically, that's the tier 3. We shift into what we call tier 3 recovery activities. And the trigger in the plan is that we, at that point, shift 50% of the fees coming in from the burrowing owl fee to these recovery actions. So we stop buying the land and we start doing active recovery, like captive breeding and things like this that are more intensive. Where we are on that, I could have put it in there and I didn't, but basically where we are on that line right now, we're right on the line. So actually last year 107 was way above the line, and then 74 is like right on the line. So if we were to go below that, we would shift into tier 3. Now we're kind of short-circuiting that requirement a little bit because as we've been discussing with the burrowing owl survey group, everybody is kind of in the same boat, and I think in agreement in saying, well, why should we know the numbers are low and they're going down? Why should we wait until until we find out what we already know, which is that we need to do these recovery actions? So let's start planning for that now, and that's what we're doing. So we're already setting the wheels in motion for those tier 3 activities. It may be that technically, if the numbers were to rebound the next couple of years, technically we may not actually have to do that according to the plan. But I think we're not speaking for the agency, but I think we're probably going to do that anyway, just to be prepared. Mostly because those activities require so much agency approval. We know it's going to take months and maybe a year to get those done. So we are kind of still trying to walk and chew gum at the same time a little bit, even though technically the plan probably doesn't say we have to yet. But that's what the graph is.
Well, that's kind of a softball question. The other question I had was, we did. You've talked about looking at properties, but we did have specifically for burrowing owls stay-ahead provisions with respect to, I think, both development of nesting habitat and kind of general managed habitat, right, whether it was being used for nesting or not. So are we going to be looking at that at some point to kind of see how we're doing there?
Yes, but we're okay. We just had our first official impacts on, within that fee zone, where a project paid a fee. It was for a project in the First Avenue area, and it was a little more than an acre, a little less than an acre. I forget the exact number, but it was around an acre. And so the true test is going to be coming next year when that Evergreen project I was referring to, also called Arcadia, that's going to impact 81 acres of land within the fee zone.
It was like 3-to-1, wasn't it? The state had provision, I thought, was it some kind of 3-to-1?
I can't remember if there was a ratio.
Yeah, I don't think there's a ratio, but so we are, but it's finding the appropriate. So the management plans. I mean, I could make a straight face argument and say the management plans are an attempt to do what you're describing. The city, well, the regional authority's talking about enrolling at least part of their land in the reserve system as land in lieu of some of their projects. And as part of that deal, we would say recovery of the species needs to be part of that agreement with us. So we're working that out with the regional authority. We'll see how it goes. But buying land that's suitable habitat for the owls, where they, short of buying something that we hope in some distant future that they'll show up at, which is on the border with San Benito County. So I'm not worried about the stay ahead now, but within the next 3 or 4 years, I might be, if we don't have any land that's that we would consider suitable breeding habitat for them. The county's enrolling a bunch of land in the reserve system over the next few years. The OSA Coyote Valley site will be enrolled. You could argue that parts of the Coyote Valley site is suitable habitat for the owls. And then, well, what do we do to enhance it would then be the next step. So buying the land or enrolling the land into the reserve system is sort of happening, but is it the right land?
Right.
Yeah. But to date, impacts on owls have been minimal. But it's the cumulative effect of what's been going on for the last 20 years that we're now seeing. Yeah. And what factor the drought's played in this, we really don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions? I have one, and that's that this almost reminds me, or it does remind me of a World War II Navy movie where the klaxon is going off. Now hear this, now hear this. We're beyond that point, it seems. And so, we've got to be smarter, move faster, because we're not going to have burrowing owls.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a fair statement.
All right, so if we can move on to the budget, and that is it.
Yes, Jill Mulross, who is our budget analyst, is going to come up and give you a short presentation on what the end of year numbers look like. So this is the final budget report for fiscal year 14-15. And you may be wondering, well, why are you doing it now? Well, we didn't get the final budget numbers until like August, right, Jill? Wasn't that about right? We got the final breakdown on everything and all the revenues and expenses. Yeah.
Good evening, committee members. I'll be going over the final report for fiscal year 15 revenue and budget expenditures. This presentation accompanies the final report, which was given at the September meeting to the governing board. On September 17th, the report was presented to the governing board for review and approval. The report identified final revenue received and final expenditures made through the end of fiscal year 15, or June 30th, 2015. Detail, our final revenue totaled $7,524,496. This amount surpassed the revenue projection of $7,335,000, which was presented at the January 15th, 2015 Governing Board meeting. Meetings and open discussion with our co-permittees assisted the agency to clearly identify and follow through on receipt of all anticipated fees. This is a detail of our revenue received, so you can see what funds came in from what locations. And this is a detail of our expenses. Our fiscal year 15 budget for expenses was $2,221,440. Final costs were well below budgeted expenditures, so about $300,000. Little less than $300,000. And in review, the projected revenue and expenditures for fiscal year 15 were within the parameters presented at the Governing Board meeting on January 15th, 2015. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Edgerton, for that wonderful photograph.
It was my pleasure. That's my screensaver on my computer.
It is
Well, when I
on
saw the
mine as
report,
well.
I said, why is my screensaver popping up on the report? For a minute, I couldn't figure out what was going on. I do have a question. Can you go back one slide? Oh, I know. In your notes, when I was reading through them, you had mentioned about the endowment and where that was going to go, possibly with the county. My understanding is the county only puts money into government secured securities, and I would recommend that you look at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation.
We met with them last week.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
As an alternative, but I think
Yes.
that would be an alternative to look. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all I
No,
wanted to
thank
make a
you.
comment about that.
Because if we hadn't known, that would be very.
Well, I'm very good at making recommendations after the event's already happened, so I'm consistent.
Yeah, and actually, you put us in touch with the right person to facilitate that
That's right.
meeting.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and we also met with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, NIFWF they're called. They're out of Washington, but they have a San Francisco office, and they have a similar setup where they invest. They're more specialized. They invest conservation monies, whether through land trusts or government agencies, into funds very similar to what the Silicon Valley Community Foundation does.
Okay.
We were very impressed with the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, with the professionalism and the very polished, great. We were all very impressed with their presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have two questions. On your detail of revenue, you list the various cities, governmental agencies. Are those funds that have come in from the agencies or from the area?
I'll let Jill answer it, sorry.
The funds, the revenue that we've received, these are specifically from our partners as listed, or the cities, the area. So it's wherever within that area, in the city of Morgan Hill, the city of San Jose, that project is.
Okay, so if a developer in that area, his fee that he paid would be in that area, not down in others or something else?
Absolutely not. No, it would be under the city of Morgan Hill. In fact, if you look at the actual report, it does detail, this is a synopsis, but it does detail on the report dollars coming in for western burrowing owl fees, for land cover fees, for nitrogen deposition.
And the other question I had, is there a detail that is in the report that tells what comprised the administrative costs, what those various costs are in the grants? Is that in the report that I can read?
Yeah, it would be, yeah, we can get that to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So just to go over a little bit the slide you see here, so the last couple, you got the participating special entity fees. That's where special districts like Gavilan College, government agencies like Caltrain and Caltrans, and PG&E were able to use the plan to mitigate for their endangered species impacts, and that's So they didn't sign on like Gilroy Morgan Hill did to be part of this organization, but they take advantage of the existence of the plan to mitigate for their project's impact in the plan area. And then the nitrogen deposition fees only, that's outside the plan area, where we wrote letters, or somebody did. We've been writing letters now to projects in Mountain View or Cupertino and say, hey, your project is creating nitrogen through car trips, and our plan only deals with our impacts. You should do something. So we've had pretty good success getting projects outside the plan area to at least recognize that they do impact the plan area. And the other, I forgot what the other is, Jill, on there.
The other is receipts that we have received from overpayments, a small overpayment, and then finally there is a serpentine mitigation of around $40,000 that was put into place. It's 3 years, and it doesn't really fall under any particular jurisdiction, nor does it. It's another.
Oh, is that the Christian Valley?
That's Valley Christian. Yes. That's,
Yeah. And that's something that happened with the previous director. So I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Oliver, can I ask you very quickly to repeat what it is that you want me to provide to you?
I just wanted to get a breakdown of what's comprised in the expense for the administrative support grant service, just a breakdown of what's the $771,200 breaks down into various expenditures. I just wanted to see what those were.
Okay, a detail of the expenditures, because you do have the final expenditures on the report.
Yeah, he wants it detailed on the administrative stuff, just,
Yeah?
yeah.
Okay.
So everything that we've spent on the administrative, like my salary, your salary,
No worries.
yeah.
I just wanted to, I don't have that full report. I just.
Yeah, no, that's yeah,
Give
yeah.
it-
Yeah, we can give that to all of you if you'd like to take a look at it.
Does that include that 2-week trip to Hawaii, or?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did have one question on the, so when you say that participating special entity, I noticed on the detail Apple was included in there?
Oh, that's under the nitrogen deposition fees only. is
That was,
Apple.
okay.
Yeah.
So you convinced them to pay a fee?
It wasn't me. It was Ken and Julie and Stu Weiss and Audubon and whoever else was involved with that. So
And we're starting to see that kind of move forward.
They volunteered to do it?
Yeah, Apple was pretty good to work with from, in the ending, and we're starting to see now the massive Santa Clara City Place project that they want to put on a landfill. I mean, that's already in their EIR, from what, I'm not dealing with that one, but from what I understand, it's in their
Correct.
EIR. So we're already seeing that effect, which is, I'm sure, something San Jose is going to be really happy about, because they
Yeah.
were not
Yes,
pleased
and-
about that.
And we
You know,
wrote
it's
a
a
comment
contention
letter on
point.
City Place and
Yeah.
Centennial Gateway. So did the state. The state did too, and groups like Julie's group. And so,
And just to remind me, on those fees, are they used directly for serpentine habitat restoration, or exactly what are those directed towards?
they'll be used for management. You could call it restoration, but they'll be used for. As you know, intensive management is required of those serpentine grasslands to keep out the non-native grasses. So whether it's goat grass management or grazing infrastructure, so that's surveys. It'll be used on those sort of activities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, one question. Yeah, I had a question about the report itself, and that is that under the line item conservation strategy implementation, where we were underspending, I call it underspending by about a factor of 2 actuals to plan. Is that a staffing issue, or what is the?
I'm sorry. What?
Like on the final expenditures for cost center 3.
Yeah.
So the budget was 490 $1,000?
Yeah, part of it was, and we caught this late in the game. I will be a little bit critical of ICF here. They were they were classifying things in category 1, which is administrative, and it should have been done in category 3. So there's a fair amount of money that should have been. So that's part of it. Part of it is we are heavy on the planning side of things right now, and we don't. So we're playing a little bit of catch up. We're creating personnel rules, financial policies, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a heavy lift on creating sort of the organizational structure of the agency. So and also just running in the office, we're using consultants, which are expensive versus staff. You know, it's sometimes double, triple the cost to do things that if we had a staff, we would have. But that's not how the model was set up at this agency. I'm working to kind of create a better balance with that, where we have a combination of consultants and staff do the work. So that's part of it. So staffing is an issue, yes. But it was also the expenses that should have been in category 3 weren't. But category 3 is going to grow quite a bit because we're doing that restoration project at Calero this year. We're doing the design. We're going to be doing more burrowing owl work, hopefully. So I see it growing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Yes, correct. You are correct. Not Angie less, but
No, but I mean, it's you're looking at the taxpayer's bottom line.
Trying.
Well, I have one other question.
Okay.
Is there any relationship with the budget and the HCP fee per acre? I think, isn't there an automatic increase each year?
Correct.
Now, does that have any relationship at all to our expenses and our budget? So, you know, if I'm on a homeowners association, I have a budget, they say,
Right.
well, we're right on budget, so we don't have to increase the fees.
Right.
We're below the budget, why are we increasing the fees?
Right. So long term, the money, there's a certain percentage that's set aside for administrative. But most of the money that we collect is supposed to go towards restoration, creation activities, or acquisition and land and managing those lands. So we earmarked $10 million for acquisition this year of fees to go towards acquisition, and then I'm in the process of negotiating with OSA now on our share of managing Coyote Ridge. So you'll start seeing more and more of that money going towards those sort of activities. Yep. Right now, it's just in the bank, the county bank, earning horrible interest.
Okay. I also want to thank Ed and Troy for having everything in the agenda so we could read it ahead of time. It really makes for a more educated board when we can do that, rather than because I'll read it through, I'll make notes, and then I'll go through one more time, just because this is a new language for me, and so it was very helpful to have the burrowing owl report so I could read it through.
Great, and Jill and Angie were responsible for that too.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to number 5, the executive officer report.
Yes, and I'll start off by just saying the Vacaville conference is November 18th, and I know some of you went last year. I'll be going this year. So that's that California Conservation Planning Coalition conference. And you had mentioned Jess Brown, so the board approved his appointment, and he's replacing Liz Caprio, who left the Farm Bureau. So he's going to finish out her term.
Okay.
So the meeting in September, the implementation board also adopted a resolution modifying the participating special entity policy to allow for the executive officer to approve PSE agreements that are not EIRs. So Gavilan College, for instance, was an EIR, so that would still go to the implementation board. Something if the EO views that the governing board or the implementation board should weigh in on, they will also be going to the respective boards. If it's controversial or it's a policy issue that the EO feels that the board should weigh in on. So the main reason of this is we got a lot of small ones like maintenance projects through PG&E or things that are either CAT exempt or mitigated neg decks that are pretty straightforward. And given our boards only meet every other month, it's just to try, and there's sometimes some very time-sensitive deadlines on when these projects need their approval from us. It's just to make the process more efficient, and the board granted the EO that authority to, at least on these projects that are not triggering an EIR. I was in Sacramento last week, and this is something that I probably going to come back to the PAC for help, PAC members. There's the cap and trade monies. There's the second investment plan is now on the table. There's $1 billion, and we're trying to influence how that money is spent. We're trying to get monies earmarked for wildlands conservation because we believe between the carbon that's sequestered in the soils, the land that is protected, it's not converted to either vineyards or houses or whatever, and it's protected as range land or as wildlands. Both above and below carbon sequestration is very important. We're trying to make that case to the state that some of the cap and trade dollars should go to oak woodland habitat, grassland habitat, not just farms and forests. It's fine that it goes to farms and forests, but these other habitat types are also can be carbon sinks. There's a professor out of Riverside, UC Riverside, Dr. Allen, who's done a lot of really interesting research on how carbon is held in desert soils, and it's at pretty high levels at scrub habitat in Southern California and the grassland habitat throughout the state. And I can pass on some of that information if you'd like to take a look at it. So one of the things that John Hopkins, who leads our coalition, would like is, because we're sort of the gold standard by default, I guess, of HCP, NCCPs, but trying to create a local stakeholder group that would lobby our state representatives to try to get more on the radar of the Senator Bells and the assemblymen and women of our region to try to influence the debate and how that money is being spent. The NCCPs and the HCP is a partnership between the state and federal government. A percentage of the funding that comes towards implementing our plan is supposed to come from the state and federal government. So the $650 million plan over 50 years, there isn't a number that's put in the plan that says the state shall give you this, the Fed shall give you this, but it's sort of implied that they're a funding partner. Well, between sequester at the federal level and other issues and going on where the feds just don't have the money, or they're just, I won't get into the politics of that, but there's just a lot. The funding of Section 6 grants, back in the day when Riverside County started their plan, they got $10 million Section 6 grants to acquire land. Now 2 is the max. So we're trying to create a national coalition of HCPs to get senators and congressmen from the states such as Florida and Texas more interested in HCPs and NCCP, or HCPs, not NCCPs. So we're trying to come at it from two angles. So back to the NCCP, the state was supposed to help fund this plan. It wasn't just supposed to be developer fees and local government doing it. It was also supposed to be the state and the feds. And one way to do this could be this cap and trade funding. It's kind of a twofer, so to speak. It would provide us with funding to help with acquiring lands, and it would help the state meet their obligations that was implied with the agreement that was signed by all parties a couple of years ago. So probably sometime early next year, going to reach out to you all, as well as members of the Sierra Club and the business community, to try to put pressure on our electeds, nice pressure, to say, this is a big issue, it's important for us, this cap and trade money just shouldn't be going towards high-speed rail and protecting farmland in the Central Valley. So that's what we'll be doing, and hopefully you'll be interested in helping out. Regional general permit update. Got some good news. We should get a regional general permit, which would help both public and private projects get through the core 404 process. I'm expecting we'll get the permit by the end of the year. And part of the requirement of the permit is we have to develop an interim mitigation strategy until we have an in-lieu fee program approved by the interagency review team, which is made up of various federal and state agencies. And so as part of this interim strategy, we have to do we have to have pre-mitigation. So this is stay ahead, Jan, in the true sense of the word. So we'll have a project constructed by next fall, and then both private and public sector projects will be able to take advantage of the regional general permit. So if Mr. Oliver had a project where it was impacting 1/10 of an acre of a wetland and maybe 100 linear feet of riparian, your project would not get stuck in that black hole. You would get your permit from the Corps within 30 to 45 days. So that's a win for us. And then the mitigation would be combined with, so the fees associated with the habitat plan would then facilitate a restoration or creation project meeting the core rules. So there will truly not be, you won't have to build a wetland per our rules, and you won't have to construct a wetland per their rules. We'll be combining the two. So, and then the site will be managed by us. Well, there will be some extra things we'll have to do to meet the core rules, but it'd be a lot easier process for both the public and private sector project proponents. So our next step is to engage the regional board and try to get some integration there. We're hopeful that we'll get a regional board's certification for our regional general permit, but they won't certify all the activities, but at least we can try to get them to certify some of the activities under the RGP, and then begin a dialogue with them on trying to integrate the 401 process through the regional board into what we do, and then truly have one-stop shopping with at least ESA permitting and water, 401 and 404 permitting. So we'll see. It was quite a uphill battle, but when I met General Toy in August, it was pretty clear he got what the issue was, and they have a new regulatory chief there. Her name is Tori White, and we've been working with her, and it's been a completely different sort of tone of engagement since she took over and since General Toy got involved. So Black Mountain Financial accounting software, tracking software has been integrated into our activities right now, so we'll be able to run a lot more slick reports on where the funds are going and how we're tracking them, so it'll be part of a better financial housekeeping that will, and Jill took the lead on that and did a great job, and we're still, working through the kinks, but it's, it won't be just Excel spreadsheets anymore. It'll be an actual and accounting financial software package. We're also working on creating all pertinent financial policies. They will be presented to the governing board for approval in January. We're also developing personnel policies, and we hired a firm, CPS HR, to help us with developing personnel policies, job descriptions, all those things that we didn't have. We are hiring a principal program manager. We will expect to make a decision early this month on who that person will be, and hope to have that person on in early next year, and that'll help a lot with us being able to manage the workload and a lot of the different programs and processes that we're managing.
That's a staff position, not
staff
a...
position,
Okay. Correct,
yeah. And I know you all are concerned about funding, so we have some, the ICF team is great. I have no complaints. I wish they were all my staff, but when you look at paying a professional a good salary, and even when you factor in benefits for that person, the ICF person, because of the overhead that they have to charge to stay in business, it's sometimes a delta of $100,000 between what the staff person would cost versus the consultant. And ICF is middle of the road in cost. They're not high, they're not low. There's some consulting firms that are lower, some that are higher, but so it's not like we're being charged $300 an hour or something like that. So it just gives you an idea that the quality of the work is great from ICF, but we do not have people that are in the office every day. I'm not interacting. They're not local, and also because they're a for-profit business, they need to make money to stay in business. So by having a staff person here all the time, you develop the capacity, the institutional knowledge, and you also start to develop sort of the financial sustainability, because it just doesn't add up long term. Our administrative costs will be through the roof. Yeah. And it's striking a balance between consultants who do specialized tasks and run specific programs versus staff that are running more of the administrative and program management stuff. So it's finding that balance, because there is a tipping point if you have too much staff too. So it's just trying to figure out what that sweet spot is. Just Jill and I. Yeah. Third, correct. Yeah. Land enrollment update. Well, we talked about Coyote Ridge, so I won't get into that. We are going to be enrolling Calero Park into the reserve system, and it will be managed for, so it is a park, so it'll be balancing recreation and species management, but what'll happen is, so the county is enrolling these lands in lieu of fees. We have a private program too, where if the land associated with a private development meets certain criteria, it can be enrolled in the reserve system as an offset for fees. So that's what the county's doing. That's what OSA is doing too. That's why Coyote Valley is going to be enrolled in the reserve system. So Calero is the first county property that will be enrolled. I think we're enrolling about 2,300 acres, and it will offset their project impacts associated with annual grassland, oak woodlands, and serpentine. And it will be managed a lot more intensely for the species. Not that the county doesn't do a good job now, but we will be spending money to manage it for the butterflies and the frogs and the salamanders and all that.
Is that potential burrowing owl?
Calero, not so much. Maybe wintering, but there are some county lands that, yes. Troy would know a little bit more about which properties, but the Coyote Valley, OSA Coyote Valley piece, definitely potential burrowing owl.
And on Calero, so you mentioned some of the species in the serpentine. There's not much serpentine in there. It's pretty small.
Yeah, there's quite a bit. It's over on that recent acquisition they had that.
San Vicente.
Yeah, thank you, Rancho San.
Oh, Rancho San
Yeah.
Vicente. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That I understand.
Yeah.
That's part of Calero then?
Yes.
Ah.
Sorry, I just used
Then I
Calero
understand
instead of the
because
big.
Calero doesn't
No.
really have any. Okay.
Very, very little and low quality besides.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
okay, then that
Yeah,
explains it.
yeah. This is, I would say, the new Calero.
I didn't know they were going to add it to that. Okay.
Yeah.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
There should be a staging area all next year.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah, that you'll be able to access that new area off McKean.
Yeah, we were out there with them
Cool.
several months ago with sighting of their trails with the wildlife agencies, and they were doing a good job to try to avoid more sensitive areas. Yeah. So we're collaborating with PG&E on acquiring lands. We hope, because they have an HCP they're working on. They would like to do pre-mitigation for that HCP. It's supposed to be approved within the next 2 or 3 years. So they need it for a lot of the same things that we're covering: the frogs, the salamanders, the butterfly, not as much with the plants. So if we do and this is where the tracking software comes in, because if we acquire a 1,000-acre parcel with them, let's say they buy in for 200 acres, that doesn't count towards our reserve system. It counts towards their reserve system. They will set up an endowment, and we will manage that land jointly for them. It'll be protected within our landscape, but it won't mitigate things that are going on associated with our plan. So we applied for discussions with private landowners continue. I can't get into too much details about that, but we are in negotiations with some private landowners. One property would be a conservation easement. The other 2 would be fee title. I can talk about the Lamont property. It was discussed in closed session, as it has been agendized. But we applied for a $2 million Proposition 1 grant. That's one of those water conservation bonds. And the upper watershed of Penitentiary Creek runs through Lamont. There's some really great groundwater resources on his property too. So things are looking good with the negotiations with Dr. Lamont. We still don't have a deal, but I'm cautiously optimistic. And this Proposition 1 grant, if we get it, will help go towards acquiring that property.
Is that above Alum Rock Park or below?
Yeah,
It's above?
yeah, above.
Back where the OSA has a bunch of property.
Yes, and the water district too. TNC, yeah, that area.
And how many acres was that?
664.
Oh,
Yeah, it might be a little less than that. There's some issues related to the actual acreage, so we're trying to work that issue out with him. we will be submitting a Section 6 grant. That's that federal program I referred to that at one point gave you 10 to 12 million a year per project. Now gives you 2. We would use that either for the Lamont acquisition or one of these other ones we're negotiating with the landowners on. I've met with Nature Conservancy, the Wildlife Conservation Board. The Wildlife Conservation Board is sort of a branch of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's which are all under the auspices of the Natural Resource Agency of the state. So they are sort of the land acquisition arm of DFW, and I met with them about partnering on some of these projects, these land acquisitions, and they were very interested, and they might come out in December to take a look at some of our some of these properties we're in negotiations with, including Lamont. We've also had some discussions with the Federal Bureau of Reclamation. They have money too for acquisition. There was $1 million of their money was used towards the Coyote Ridge acquisition. So the state has this local assistance grant program, and we submitted 3 grants, one for burrowing owl, one for the pathogen Phytophthora, which is similar to sudden oak death. They're kind of in the same family. Study it. So these are research grants, and a third was for hydroperiod analysis and how it's affecting the ability of frogs and salamanders to breed in the Santa Cruz Range. And we're working with the RCD, the Loma Prieta. Not the Loma. Is it the Loma Prieta RCD? I always get the Guadalupe Loma Prieta RCD. I think that's their name. And we're working with them on that grant. So all 3 grants were shortlisted. We submitted full proposals in August. As noted, we're continuing to work with the Regional Waste Authority on trying to do a burrowing owl management plan on their lands, that 180 acres that they own. And I mentioned we're working with the private landowner to benefit burrowing owls. We've completed 2 RFQ processes for on-call consultant services, one for restoration design and one for property appraisals. So these lists are set up where you do an RFQ, the private firms submit their qualifications to us, and then we review them, and the ones that make the cut are on a list of preferred consultants for 5 years. In the appraisal list, I think we have 6 or 7 firms, and then on the restoration design list, we have there were 8, but one of them just merged with the other ones, so there are 7. And we're doing one for species monitoring also. So it just allows us to be a little quicker and nimbler. Walt, as you mentioned, you got to move quick, so we'll be able to do things. Instead of doing an RFP every time, we can just choose firms from that list. And finally, the conditions implementation guide for covered activities is now street ready. It took a while to get it done. It's on our webpage. So that sort of lays out how the conditions of a plan apply to projects. So it's sort of a guidebook just to help county planners and public works departments implement the plan. It can also be used for a private developer or a consulting firm to, at least get a sense of what, instead of looking for it in the plan, there's a guidebook that they can refer to. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. November 19th implementation board meeting has been canceled. So anyone who had that on their calendar for 3 p.m., you don't have to come. Any future public advisory committee initiated agenda items for our Thursday, February 4, 2016 meeting. All right. And then also, we do have the meeting scheduled for the rest, for all of 2016, at the bottom of the second agenda sheet. And do we have anything more? And let's adjourn at 7:52. And thank you all.
Oh, thank you. It's a long meeting, and appreciate you guys sticking through to the end on it.
You okay?
It was too long, obviously.